Hey everyone, it's Steve here, and welcome to a new beginner visual effects tutorial where we'll be learning how to do green screen effects using Blender 2.8. So I did a video about 4 or 5 years ago now on how to do visual effects in Blender, but things have changed quite a bit. Methods have gotten easier and different, so I decided that it's time for a new video on how to do green screen and just how easy it is and free it can be to create amazing green screen effects at home with nothing but a camera and a green screen. I'd like to start off by thanking this video's sponsor, Storyblocks. Formerly known as VideoBlocks, Storyblocks offers a massive online collection of royalty-free stock footage. If you're working on a short film or maybe a documentary or video project and you'd like to take the quality to the next level, add a few shots from Storyblocks and make your project look 100 times more professional. I was really blown away by the quality of the shots they offer at an amazing price. Plus, you can get a completely free week of Storyblocks when you sign up with the link in the description, which is great because we'll actually be using a shot from Storyblocks in today's tutorial, and with that free week, you can download the footage we'll be using in this tutorial and get to try out the website. So before we get into the editing aspect of it, I'd like to cover a few tips on how to film really great green screen footage that will be really easy to composite later in Blender. And obviously you will also need a green screen. I just purchased mine off of Amazon. I'll leave a link in the description where you can get one yourself. It's essentially just a large green sheet that could be draped anywhere or hung anywhere and work as a green screen. For me, it worked well to just hang it on my shelving unit here. I just draped it over it and it made for a nice green screen backdrop. Another tip is to set it up in an environment where you might be able to kind of control the lighting a bit. This actually leads me into my next tip, which is you want to set some lights up just on the green screen itself and not on your subject to remove the shadows and soften shadows on the green screen, as these are most often the most difficult things to chroma key out later on. If you can, it's also great to have some backlighting on your subject. This adds a little bit of edge lighting around your subject and helps to separate your subject from the green screen even more. Obviously, this will depend a little bit on the footage you are using, and this leads me into my last tip, which is know what footage you're going to be using. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be using a shot from Storyblocks. They offer a ton of footage to choose from, and I'm going to be going for an artistic shot of a large city landscape. The shot I'm going to be doing today is actually inspired by a Coldplay music video. It's probably one of the coolest music videos I've ever seen. It's just jam-packed of creative, cool visual effects shots, and I was kind of inspired by the shot in that music video when they have their singer Chris Martin over a large landscape just kind of sitting there singing the song. So that's kind of what inspired this shot. We're going to be filming someone in front of a green screen, and then at the end of the video I'll show you how to add that into a large city landscape. So over on Storyblocks, we're just going to choose the footage that we are looking for in this video. Like I said, I'm looking for a large landscape to put myself in, so I'm just going to search for city landscape, although there is tons of different options you could use on Storyblocks for a green screen shot. This is the one I decided to go with. I thought this one would also be cool, but I just didn't end up using it. You could use this one if you would like. The one I ended up using is, if you just scroll down here a bit, so here's a shot that I used in my video and we'll be using in this tutorial, but there are many shots on this website that would work amazing for this, as you might have seen just scrolling through them. And if you're going for a different kind of shot, there's all kinds of options available on Storyblocks. If you want to go through something more abstract, you can go through backgrounds. And if you're filming something like a music video or something, some of these would be really awesome to throw in the background of a green screen shot or something. Really cool, all kinds of options. So take a look around and you'll probably find something that will work well for you. So now that you have your shot picked out that you can be using in your scene, you'll want to kind of match the lighting of the sun on your subject. So you're going to kind of have to fake it with some lights, but if you have the shadows on your character's face the same as it is in the environment, it will look a whole lot better. So you're going to kind of want to look at the shadows in your scene and then set up the lighting around your green screen to match that as close as possible. So once you picked out what your background shot is going to be, you're going to want to make sure you match some of those settings on your camera while you film your green screen. So for example, make sure you're shooting at the same frame rate. This is 24 FPS. And make sure you also copy the focal length. Sometimes you can't tell this information, but you can kind of estimate if it's a wide shot or a telephoto shot to kind of shoot your subject with the right focal length, as that will blend in a lot better. And then the last tip is to get your subject as far away from the green screen as possible, while obviously actually still being within the green screen, as the more depth of field you can add to your scene, the more blurry the green screen can be, and the easier that green screen is just going to cut out really easy. So once you have your green screen footage shot, you'll be able to just download it onto the computer and get started. If you're not shooting your own footage, I will be including the shot I shot of myself for this video in the description, so you can check that out and download it, and we'll get started in Blender. So over in Blender 2.8 now, I'm using the Alpha 2, but by the time this video is coming out, there already might be the beta, which is coming out in just a few days from now, and you can download that as well. It's getting very stable now, and you shouldn't have too many issues using Blender 2.8 now. That's why I'm going forward with it. So the first thing I'm going to do over in Blender now is open up that green screen footage. So I'm going to go over to the top here and click Movie Clip Editor. Once you're in the Movie Clip Editor, you just click Open right on top here, and you can open that footage. Just open that green screen clip that you shot or downloaded. All right, here I have it up right now. I'm just going to hit N to close off our Properties tab there, as I don't need it. So here's a shot with me right in the green screen, and it looks pretty good, except for the fact that we obviously have a lot of junk around the outside of our frame that we need to mask out. So this is done really easy just by switching from tracking up on top here to masking. Then you just go Add and add a circle mask. You click that and it will be added down in the lower corner here. If you just hit G on your keyboard though, you can drag it over to your subject. And then we're just going to grab some of these handles and pull them out to the corners of the mesh. So I'm going to scroll in here a little bit with my scroll wheel, grab that bottom handle, pull it to the bottom of the subject here, grab the side one here, make sure you grab the middle of the handle, and pull that one out to the corner here, right there. And then again, these two handles as well, just making sure you grab the center of the handle. And it's just a very basic mask, but it's all we need in a shot like this to cut out all the unnecessary footage and just keep the subject in frame. So I'm just grabbing these handles, fitting it around my subject a little tighter. The tighter you can get it, the better, but you'll want to scrub through your footage here in a second and make sure that your subject never goes out of this mask. Otherwise, it would look obviously not good. So with that set up, let me give myself a little bit more room right here. I'm going to scrub through the footage on our bottom timeline here. I'll make that a little bigger. And as long as the subject never goes outside of the green screen, as you can see right here, my head goes out a bit. So I'm just going to have to grab that handle and make sure it's large enough to contain my head. And then the handle of the guitar here goes out a little bit as well. So make that a bit bigger. And as long as the subject stays within that box now, we'll be good. So we can just leave that as it is now, and we just switch over to the compositing tab here. So click compositing. You want to click use nodes, and we already have backdrop enabled. We can hit N to close off our properties tab again, and we can make our timeline a bit smaller now. And we're not going to be using this render layer, so I'm just going to hit X and delete that. I'm going to go Shift A and add in that movie clip. So input, movie clip. And if you click the little box right here, it will already be opened in Blender, so you can just select it there, and you'll have your movie clip. And if you go Control Shift and left click on that render layer, you'll get a viewer layer. Now you can see I'm in the background, I'm very large, and what you can do is use Alt V to make that bigger, or V to make it smaller. I'm obviously going to use V to make myself a bit smaller. And now let's go ahead and add that mask to the shot here. So for that, all I'm going to do is go Shift A, and we're going to go down to Matte. And the key to this, get it? Key, there's a pun. The key to this is going to be using the keying node. So go ahead and drop the keying node into your compositor here. And what we're going to do is we're going to run that mask into the keying node. So you have to add another input, and that is going to be the mask. So you go ahead and Shift A, add input, mask. You drop that in right there. You click the little drop down there and you can grab that mask that we created a moment ago and just drop that into the garbage mat. And if I right click, or let me first connect my footage now to that keying node. I'm just going to grab that and drop it into the image. Now if I take a look at this by Control Shift clicking the keying node, you can see that I'm cut out and it's not right. So what I want to do is I want to add an invert node. So color, invert, and just drop that into your mask. And you can see it's working the right way. Now the one issue you might notice is that the mask is too small, and that is because the resolution within Blender needs to be set to the same resolution as the footage we used. So jumping over to our settings here, what we want to do is we want to go to our output, We want to make sure that the resolution here is set to 4K, as that's what I shot my footage in. And it's important to shoot your footage at the highest quality possible on your camera because it will give you more details to work with in compositing. So I'm just going to change the resolution here to be 4K, which is 3840 by 2160. So type that in, and then your mask should automatically scale to the right size if you have it set to scene size here. So just check scene size again to update it, and you can see that the mask is working. Now we have to set up the chroma key color. So this is the first setting that you should change on your keying node, and it's going to be the color of your green screen. Right now it's set to white, so it's cutting me out. You want it to be set to the green screen, and you want it to be set to the darkest area of the green screen I found. That gives you the best results. So I'm going to grab the little eyedropper there, and I'm going to drop it into a shadowy area of the green screen. Something under my leg here would work. So you choose that, and right off the bat you see you get pretty good results actually. I'm getting cut out a little bit, but it really cropped out most of that green screen. So now what you're going to do is you're going to use the clip black and the clip white settings to kind of tweak the amount the green screen is cutting out. So if I add some more black, you can see it gets even more cutting out on me. So I want to take some of the white down. So the more I pull this down, the more you can see I start to get my shoulder back, which is looking pretty good. So I'm going to take that way down, and then I'm going to take the black down even a bit more. Almost down to nothing. And then I'm going to go Control Shift and change it to the matte setting because I found it's easier to see how good your chroma key is working when you change it to the matte setting here on your keying screen as you get the black and white, which makes it really obvious if you're cutting into your mesh or not. With that set up, I'm just going to zoom in here a little bit with Alt-V. You can see that even with the clip black set all the way to 0, I'm getting a little bit of choppiness in my, my clothing here still. So that means that the color of the green screen needs to be tweaked a little bit. So now you can go in here and kind of fine tune the color, pulling it back and forth to see which colors crop out the green screen, but not my shirt as much. Obviously, you don't want to wear green in front of a green screen too. If I didn't mention that earlier, I'm mentioning it again. And you just want to kind of pull this around until you get an area that looks like it's cutting out the most background and least shirt. And then you have to bring the colors up a little bit. If it's going to still be cropping out your shirt, you have to take the colors up just a little bit. Looks about right. And you can see there's a little bit here, but we're going to fix that with some of the other settings now. So with that set up, we can now adjust our black again a little bit and cut out even more of that nasty green screen. And then pull the white around as well to kind of feather that a bit. Now we're going to go ahead and start changing the other options. Now the despill factor and balance, that is more for the color. That's not going to cut out the green screen at all, but the screen balance itself will. And you're going to want to take the screen balance down to a lower value, down to about a 0.2. I found looks pretty good. So pull it down to about a 0.2, and that's going to give you better results on your chroma there. And then we're going to work on the edge kernel. So the edge kernel is kind of for fine tuning, and you can kind of just play around with this setting a little bit. Changing the edge kernel size and then the edge kernel radius a bit. You can see that doing this kind of cleans up the green screen a bit. We have a little bit of issue on the floor here. That's going to be our most troublesome spot as it's the shadows down there to kind of find what doesn't cut out the inside but cuts out the outside. So about a value of 0.3 for the edge kernel radius here, if I make this a little bit bigger, tolerance. And then the edge kernel radius can be somewhere around 3 to 6. I found that a 4 looks pretty well, so I'll leave it at that. Okay, so the last thing now is to work on those edges a bit. So I'm going to do that by eroding the sides of the mesh a little bit. I'm going to take this down a few clicks, and that's going to basically cut away at all of the edges on your mesh. So I'm going to go about a -3, maybe a -4. And so that's kind of cutting into my skin a little bit too. So what I'm going to do to counter that then is I'm going to feather the edge a little bit by cranking this up a few notches. And that just gives us a nicer edge that's slightly feathered, but not too feathered. And then you can give it a little bit pre-blur in the top here too. That sometimes can give you better results. Play around with it. Sometimes I found a little bit of that helps to kind of remove areas in the mesh there. You can see if it's at 0, we have a few dots in the mesh. But if you put it up a few times, there's nothing in our mask. And then a little bit of post-blur as well, just for those edges. So if we take a look at that now, you can also try a different feather fall off. This will give you different results, obviously, and it might be a nicer edge if you need it for your shot. So if we take a look at it now, you can see that the chroma is working pretty good, but I have a little bit of shadow issues still going on underneath my legs here. So you could now play around with the colors, again, just a little bit more, seeing now that we change those other settings, how much you can cut away at that. And you can see that I can actually go a little bit higher now at my darkness, and that helps to cut away at those shadows a bit. If I jump back to my matte, you can see that looks better. There's just a few dots in the mesh here, and adding a little bit more pre-blur will fix that. So this is looking pretty good. I'm not going to worry about anything else in this shot at this point. You can see that there's a little bit on the underside still of me here. I'm going to go up to about a pre-blur 4. I found looks good. And then right about there with the fall off. So that looks pretty good right there. You can see there's one little area here that you could remove if you needed to with a separate mask, but I don't really have to in this shot because the bottom is actually hidden by the buildings that they'll be overlaid on. So no need in going through that work if you don't need to. Now you just kind of want to scrub through your shot and see how it looks from all the different angles. So just scrubbing through here now, just to kind of check to see how the green screen looks, and it actually looks pretty good in most of these different areas. Again, like I said, go to the matte because you can see easier if your mesh is being cut out in the wrong spot. But this is looking pretty good. Pre-blur 5 if you need to when you see some spots might be necessary. But I like the looks of this. So that looks pretty good. I'm going to leave it as it is. Like I mentioned, you could add a second mask to cut out some of the green screen underneath the leg here if you needed to, because that was going to be visible. In my shot, it shouldn't be visible at all anyways, so I'm going to leave it as it is. And so what I'm going to do now is if you were going to just take this shot and put a still background behind it, not a moving background, you can go ahead and do that right now by adding in an alpha over. I'm just going to show you real quick. Shift A, color alpha over. Drop that right into your viewer node there. You're going to plug your green screen footage into the bottom socket here of that alpha over node. And then you can plug whatever you want into this top input to put your footage over that. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and drop in a just the movie clip that we'll be using later on. So I'm going to go ahead and go input movie clip. We can just grab that shot that's already loaded in there. Whoops, that's going to actually be the wrong shot. Go ahead and open the footage now that you downloaded from Storyblocks. So I'm just going to go ahead and locate that real quick right there. This is also 4K. And I'm just going to take that now and I'm going to drop it into the top socket to show you guys how you could overlay your footage right here. Now, of course, you would have to choose convert, pre-multiply, and you have it good to go. So you can see that's how you would do it if you're working with still footage, and you'd do some color tweaking and stuff now. I'll be doing a little bit of that later on, but because I'm going to be incorporating this into a moving shot, there's another step involved, and that's going to be first saving out our alpha footage here so we can open it back up into Blender and animate the location of it to follow our background footage. So you're just going to take the footage and plug it into your viewer node and into your composite node real quick here. And then you're going to go ahead and you're going to choose an export format. You're going to want to make sure that you're exporting an RGBA format. That includes the alpha channel, as you can see right here. And a PNG file will work fine. Just go ahead and choose an output. I'm going to quick make a new folder here for our images. I'm just going to call them alpha images. Go ahead and select that folder and hit accept. So you put all your images into this folder and make sure your FPS is set to the correct FPS. Mine is actually 23.98, so it's not quite 24 FPS. So go ahead and set that to that and you're good to go. So all you have to do now is go up into the top render here, click render animation, and as long as your timeline is set up as the right amount that fits all the footage you'll be using, I'm not using any more than 250 frames. This is more than enough actually. So once your timeline is set to the number of frames you want rendered out, all you have to do is go render and then render animation, and you'll start rendering all these frames out into that folder. Alright, now that all of our alpha shots are rendered out, I'm going to show you guys how we can blend these in to that live footage we've been using seamlessly. Well, as seamlessly as possible. I mean, I am going to be a giant me over a small city, so it might not look completely realistic, but it's very creative and it looks cool. You can't deny that. So, with that said and done, let's go ahead and close off that image there. And we're just going to switch to our layer tab here and then jump out of the movie clip editor over to our 3D viewport. So in our 3D viewport, we're going to grab that camera, we're going to hit 0, and then we're going to hit 1 on our number pad. So we're in front view, and I'm going to go Alt, Control, 0. So we snap the camera to the viewport. And with that done, I'm going to go into our camera settings here now. Let me pull this up a little bit and pull it out. With the camera selected, you're going to go down to your object data here, and we're going to choose background images. Here we're going to add an image, I'm going to choose movie clip, and we're just going to open up that background scene that we opened up a moment ago. So with that opened up, just uncheck camera clip there, and you'll see it in your background. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to grab my camera and hit Z on my number pad to pull it up along the Z axis. And I just want to pull it up so that the grid floor that you can kind of see there is in line with the city floor. Now this doesn't need to be perfect. There are add-ons for doing this, I know, but this doesn't need to be perfect in this scenario. We're just kind of getting it for ourselves to kind of be lined up. So I'm just going to double tap R then and kind of line up that floor, the grid floor you can see here, with the floor of the city. You can see if I grab this along the X and Y now, it looks like it's about in line with that, close enough. So with that set up and done, I can delete that cube, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable an add-on right now. So I'm going to go Edit, User Preferences. Let's pull this down here, and we want to use the Images as Planes add-on. So just start typing out planes, and this add-on already works with Blender 2.8, so just check that box there, and you're good to go. And with that add-on enabled, before we do anything else, I'm going to go first up into our workspace here, up into our camera settings, and I'm going to change right here the render engine from Eevee over to Cycles, because we're going to be using Cycles for this video tutorial, as Eevee currently doesn't work with image sequences. So with that done, all we need to do is go File, Import, Images as Planes. Now you're going to locate that folder that you saved all those alpha images out into. You're going to hit A to select them all, and then you're going to check Animated Image Sequence over in the Import options here. This is important, otherwise they'll be opened individually and not as an image sequence. So go ahead and choose Animated Image Sequence, and then choose the material setting to be shadeless, as we don't want this to be getting any shadows from anything. It wants to be just how it was when we shot it. And you can see here we have the video imported onto a plane here. If I was to scale this up a bit, and then grab it along the X or Y axes here by hitting G and Y, I could pull it out to there, and if I change my shading up here to be rendered, you would see that we have myself rendered in the scene here. And then to make the background city visible again in the viewport here, we're just going to go back to our render settings here, drop down to film, and then choose transparency, and that will allow the background to be visible again. So now you can take your image sequence here, and you're going to go ahead and position it where it looks best in the city. So I'm going to scale it up a bit, and then grab it along the X axis, or first of all, let's grab it along the Z axis, so it's we're kind of sitting on that red plane. And I actually found rotating this shot a little bit made it look kind of nice. Instead of rotating this plane though, what you can do is you can split your window here, just grab it up in the corner, pull it over, and I'm going to change this to be the UV image edit. Now I'm going to change it from view to UV image edit. I'm going to tab into edit mode, so we have it selected here, and then we have to put our clip in here too. So I'm going to grab our PNG right there, and if I go back to rendered over here as well, got to scroll over here and choose that rendering. Now when I tab into edit mode and I rotate this, you can see we're rotating myself on the plane without actually rotating the plane. We're just rotating the UV map. So go ahead and rotate this about 15 or -7 degrees, looks about right, just so the feet and butt kind of line up in a straight line. Something like that looks pretty good, I think. About a -6 or so from the original. And with that set up, now we can just tab out of edit mode, close that off as we don't need to change the UVs anymore, and then grab our clip to be positioned exactly where we want it in this city. So I'm going to grab it along the y-axis to kind of push myself back a bit further. I thought it looked cool to kind of put this building here in front of me, so I'm going to scale myself up now, grab it along the y-axis a bit more, and then grab it along the x-axis as well. Positioning myself over in the background here. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a mask to cut out the bottom half of my body that would be buried behind the buildings, and also give the scene something to cast some shadows on. So to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and Shift A, add in a plane. We're going to go ahead and scale this up quite large. And then we can just grab it and move it along the y-axis to pull it out closer to the object there. I'm going to go into the object settings here. So along the side here, you're going to look for your object, and then you're going to drop down to the cycle settings here. and I want this to be visible in the camera, but I don't want it to give out anything but the shadows. So choose Shadow Catcher, and this will basically mask out the part of my body here, but also receive shadows from the scene. So to put this into works, I'm just going to grab the lamp you see here. I'm going to go into our lamp settings, which is right here. Let me see, lamp settings. Yes, right here. And I'm going to choose Use Nodes, and I'm going to change it to a sun. Now, I'm going to take the sun, I'm going to drop the amount down to about 30. I found it was a nice strength for it. And if I double tap R and rotate it so it's facing the camera more, if I kind of pan out here, you can see the rotation now. In the camera view, you can see we get the shadow being cast across the ground, which is perfect for our needs as we want myself to be shadowed. Now the plane might be a little high as it's cutting off some of my arm here, so grab it along the Z axis and just pull it down so it's cropping out the parts of the body that you want to, but not everything. Somewhere around there looks pretty good. And then we can kind of adjust the shadow intensity. If I go ahead and rotate this a little bit more, you want to rotate this sun to kind of match the shadows on your scene. And this is going to be to cast shadows along the city here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in on my building here, and it might help if you make this 100% opacity now. Just going into the background images and giving the alpha 100%. You can see that we have shadows along our buildings, and then it's definitely coming from the right side over to the left side as the sunlight hits this side of the building and casts a shadow along here. So we're going to match that with our sun lamp here and our object here to kind of have the same shadow cast as that one does. Just play around with it until it looks about right. And I found that looked about right. And then you can go to your world settings here, choose Use Nodes, make the color a dark blue or so, and then you're going to take the strength down. And this is going to adjust basically how intense those sun rays really are. So that's looking pretty decent. We have the shadow being cast from our object. Now you can see there's a little bit of an issue here. If I go to solid view, our floor is still not large enough to reach our plane here. So go ahead and just scale it up a bit. Now when we switch to rendered view, we'll have even more shadows being cast by the object. Now of course it also needs to be moved down a bit now, just like before, as it was a little bit too large. Now the one other thing I did is I duplicated the sun one more time. I'm gonna go Shift D, duplicate this sun, pull it behind, and then give just a close bit of contact shadows to make it look like it's touching the ground right there. Not a long shadow, but a contact shadow essentially. So rotating the sun to be mostly coming straight down now, just to kind of give that contact shadow right where my body would be touching the city, something like that. And then this strength of this sun, I'm gonna go to sun settings here, it doesn't have to be as strong. You can tune this down quite a bit, somewhere around 4 is about right. And then you can see in the camera view, we just have those darker contact shadows and then the long overall shadow. This still might need to be rotated along the Z a little bit, just so it's kind of matching the shadows in the scene a little bit more. Something like that. And we're getting there, we're almost done. So now to add the mask, to kind of make it look like there's buildings in front of me as I'm sitting on this large city, what we're going to do is we're going to add a few cubes to our plane. So I'm going to grab that plane and then tab into edit mode. So we're adding it to the same object. And I'm just going to zoom in here to one of the buildings. If you hit Z and go to wireframed, you can see the buildings through the plane nice and easy. And I'm going to place my cursor right around that building there and go Shift A and add in a cube. We're going to go ahead and rotate this cube along the Z axis by hitting R and Z to line it up to kind of match the rotation of that building, and then just scale it down a bit. So just about the size of the building, maybe just slightly smaller, right over the building there. And then we're just going to grab that top face by switching to face select mode. It is up here, I believe, right here. Face select, grab that top face, and then hit G and Z to pull it up to be the full size of that building there. Now if I tab out of edit mode and I hit Z to go back to rendered view, you can see that that building is now sitting in front of me, which is a lot more realistic. Now if I move to the side here, you can see that the building is inside of me a little bit. So you're going to want to make sure that you grab that and pull it away along the Y-axis a little bit so it is in front of me. You might have to tweak the positioning. And you'll also want to make sure that all these objects are added in at the same timeline. So you can see I'm sitting at frame 223 right now. You might just be sitting at frame 1. I don't know why I'm even sitting there, but just stay in that frame while you add all your other objects so they're all on the same frame before we animate the camera. So now I just have to grab that building and put it back over the other building here as I moved it a little bit. And that looks to be about right there. And we're just going to do this a few times. Now with the smaller buildings, you don't have to be nearly as picky. It's going to work out just fine, even if it's not copying a building just exactly. You just want a bunch of little cubes along here to kind of break up the shadows and break up this straight line that we have going on. So I'm going to go ahead and tab into edit mode, duplicate this one more time with Shift D and move it over to this building. And we'll just go ahead and add a few more of those buildings along the bottom here. So there we have it. I just went ahead and added a handful of more small little cubes along the base here where I'm contacting the buildings to add some more shadows and kind of mask myself out using some objects. It's pretty easy, just a handful of objects, and you can add more if you want more detail, or less if you don't care that much about it. So with that done, what we're going to do now is we're going to match the camera movement. Now, there's two methods of doing this. One is camera tracking, which is the best method, but takes a bit more work and time and isn't as easy. And the other method is just keyframing it yourself, which can give you quick, easy results, but sometimes they won't look that good depending on the shot you're using. Because I'm using a shot from Storyblocks that is basically panning, it was probably filmed with a drone, so it's a nice smooth shot. It's pretty easy to go ahead and just match that movement with some keyframes right within Blender, and that's what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to click this button here, which is for automatically inserting keyframes every time I move an object. So go ahead and check it. Just remember to uncheck this object when you're done with it, or this setting I should say. So I'm going to grab my camera and then just left click right on frame 223 where I set up my buildings. So now that I did that, I'm going to jump to the end here. And because I know that these buildings are supposed to be lined up over this object here, I can see how much the camera has moved and how much I need to move it to match it. So because the camera is basically moving along the x-axis here, I'm just going to go ahead and grab it along the x-axis and then hold shift to do some more detailed movements and just move it until that building is fitting over that, that mask object that we added right there. And if I do that, then I know I pretty much almost exactly copied the camera motion between these two keyframes. Now I'm going to do the same thing every 50 frames or so, and doing the same thing, just grabbing it along the x-axis and moving it until that building fits in there nicely. Okay, so now that I went ahead and added all the keyframes for the x-axis along this mask here, you could say, I'm going to go ahead and jump back to frame 223 where I added my buildings, and I'm going to add a few keyframes along the z-axis because the camera does come up and down a little bit. So I'm going to look at the bottom of the mask here and see what information is within this mask. So you can see some of the details here and the distance they are from the object. And then I'm just going to make sure that all the keyframes are about the same. If I jump to the next keyframe here, you can see that it's pretty close, but maybe the camera needs to move along the z-axis a little bit to match that. So I'm just going to grab along the z and then click. Same thing with this keyframe. You can see this one has a lot more building in the bottom here. So I'm going to grab along the z-axis until it about matches the other one, and we're reaching about the top of the building there. And right there looks about right. Same thing with all these. Now this is not a perfect method of doing it, but it's a quick and dirty method to get decent results. Okay, so now the last step before we get into the final color grading compositing is to add a few clouds in front of me. This really helps with the scale and blending into the scene behind me. So to do this, I'm just going to use an image with some alpha mask clouds. So I'm going to use the same method of importing an image as a plane by going File, Import, Images as Planes. As long as that add-on is still enabled, you'll be good to go. And then I'm just going to grab that image right here. Again, I'll include a link in the description for this if you guys want to download it yourself. So to go ahead, I'm going to use the same settings and click, this isn't an image sequence, so you can uncheck that. But otherwise, go ahead and import the image right there. I'm going to scale it up a bit. You can see I'm inserting some keyframes because I didn't turn off my automatic keyframe insertion. I can just hover down here and hit X, delete that keyframe. And I'm just going to position these clouds over the lower half of my body, so it's kind of blending me in with that environment, you could say. And the only thing I have to do is to make those a little less intense, and that's what I'm going to do right now by splitting the window here, and this new window here, I'm going to open up the shader editor. I'm going to hit N to close off that again. All we need to do to change the amount of this is to change the amount of the alpha here, and I'm going to do that just by dropping in a color ramp node right there. The more we crank the black up, the less clouds we're going to have, and the less intense the white value is here, the dimmer they'll be. So I'm going to take this white value and make it less intense, and you can see we get some shallow clouds hovering over me there, and that looks pretty good. So I took that value down quite a bit to a dark gray, and you can see we just have some faint clouds now in front of me. Something like that should work, about a 0.06. So the last thing we're going to do is make sure that we have the passes we need enabled in our rendering settings here. So you can go ahead and check shadow and ambient occlusion, as these are two things that will be helpful to have in your render passes. And that should be it. So with that done, you can go ahead and check denoising so it renders nice and clean. We can go ahead and put our window back to a solid view and hit F12 and render. Well, the last thing you have to first do is go back to your compositing nodes and add that render layer back in. We're not using these nodes anymore, so I'm just going to go ahead and go Shift A, add an input, a render layer, and we're going to connect this now to our composite node and to our viewer node. And with that set up, all we have to do is hit F12 and render.
My computer just crashed.
Alright, and I'm back after that untimely crash. So, yep, remember to save your files. Let me be an example for you. Okay, so what we're going to do first is drop in that alpha over node that we did previously. So just go color, alpha over, and drop that right into your node here. This is going to go in the bottom socket. And then our video footage is going to go on the top socket. So go ahead and you can open up that video footage again. Just add in an input movie clip. And then click right here and grab that footage that we already have loaded in. And with that, all we have to do is plug it into the top socket, and you can see we have our footage overlaying our render. Now, we can go ahead, and the first thing I want to do is add a little bit of mist to myself here, as that's going to help blend it in with the mist in the background here, and really give it like that sense of scale to make me seem like I'm really big compared to the city. So to do that, it's going to be just a simple mix node. So Shift A, add in a color mix. Drop it right in here between the alpha over and your render layer. And all we're going to do is we're going to change the color here to be kind of the color on the city here of that mist in the background here. So if I go Control Shift and click on our video footage here, we can just choose this color then as sort of the mist you see in the background here. So just go ahead and choose something like that. And then we'll just make it a little bit darker and a little bit more pinky. Something like that looks about right. And then all you have to do is, let's go to our footage here, and take the amount way down. I found like a 0.05 looked pretty good. And there you have it, some mist over the background there. Maybe darken it just a little bit, make it a little bit more purple, make it a little darker. And that's already giving yourself a sense of scale, maybe a 0.06. And yeah, it's helping a little bit right there. One thing to mention is that I am working in 1080p now. So just if you want to switch to 1080p, save your footage down to 1080p and open it back up. I have it just right here. If I zoom in here, I have a movie clip with a scale node just set to the render size, which is 1080p now, to scale my footage down to 1080p. So for a few more things now to kind of make this match our footage, first I'm going to change the colors a little bit. So I'm going to go Shift A, add in a color balance, and drop that right in there. Okay, we'll make sure our project's saved this time. Not making that mistake again. And I'm going to change this to power slope. So by taking the slope up a bit, we kind of lighten the highlights a bit. And then by taking the power also up a little bit, we kind of darken, actually, the shadows a bit. So you're going to kind of want to play around with this until you can match the shady areas, if I zoom in here a little bit, of your buildings with the shady areas of your object. If you alt-click on your scene, you can actually see the values right there, the red, blue, and green values of an object compared to the red, blue, and green objects of another one. This, if you want to get technical, can actually help to get the exact right colors to match those numbers up, going back and forth. Some people might just prefer to do it by eye, and you can do it however you like. I'm just going to kind of find a color that looks like it blends in pretty well here with both the highlights and the shadows. And then I'm just going to give my scene a little bit of color changes to kind of match the color grading of this scene. And to do this, I'm going to first take the slope down into the slightly purpley / reddish hue here by dragging that down a little bit. And then I'm going to take my power here, and I'm going to go again to the green, which is actually inverse. The power sliders are kind of inversed. It's just the way the color works in Blender. So you're going to want to take it towards the green, and it's going to give you a little bit of a purpley hue. So taking that up there a bit to kind of help match the color that we're going for. And I think that actually looks pretty good as far as the colors go. It's starting to blend in pretty well. So the next thing that's going to really make this blend in a lot better though is we're going to add some of the clouds in our background shot over the top of the subject here. And to do that, I'm going to take my output from my movie clip and run it through a color RGB curves. So just Shift A, color RGB curves, plug it into the image right there, and then Control Shift to click on that. And I'm going to take it and make it very dark. This gives us sort of a mask between the clouds here and the background. So by doing this and then making it as taking the clouds up a bit and making the blacks as dark as possible by pulling this slider over a bit, something nice and dark, will allow us to add the highlights of this over the top of your subject. So I'm going to do that right now with a color mix. We're going to drop it in right there, change it to add. If I go add right there, and then put this in the bottom socket, Control Shift click that, you can see that we have some clouds sort of added over the top of your subject. Now we want to take the factor obviously down quite a bit on this. And the other thing is certain areas you don't want added over but are kind of getting added over, as you can see here. I found the easiest way to fix that in this scene is to just use a mask. So it's just as easy as going Shift A, distort, and adding in a matte, and a box mask. Drop that in right there. Change the size to be the whole size of your frame by increasing that scale up a bit. This value right here. And same thing with this value. We're just going to make it nice and tall. And then we're just going to move it down along the y-axis with this box here to cover up the areas that we don't want the clouds over. Now, if I Control Shift click on this, we can see we have a white and black mask. I want to invert that real quick because I want it to be black that we're putting over the factor. So go ahead and invert it. So we have the black on bottom. We're going to blur it a little bit. So go Shift A, filter, blur, drop it in there, fast Gaussian, and make it a nice blurry amount. Something like 30 should work fine. So go ahead and make that 30-30, and maybe even more. Just crank it up along the y-axis mainly is where we want it blurred. Something like that, around 100. And then all we have to do is take this value and drop it into the factor right there on our add node. Now, if we go to that, you can see that we need to move it a little bit, but we're not getting the bottom half of clouds coming over. And so that's working pretty well. Now we can go ahead and just move our mask up a bit until we get the clouds just the way we want them over the top. So that's looking pretty good. And you can see that it's kind of fading my head into the cloud here, and it's looking pretty well. If you want to adjust the factor now, all you have to do is drop in a math. So we're going to go down to math. Don't worry, it's not as scary as real math can be. We're just going to drop in a converter, math node, drop it in right there, change it to multiply, and if we take the value down here, it will take the amount of clouds down. So about a 0.3 is a nice touch, and you can get some nice looking clouds overlaying your subject here. Now a few more things to really kind of make this blend in a little bit more. First off, I thought it was saturated a little too much. So you can see what our color grade is doing here. Actually, it's affecting the whole thing. To fix that, we have to go ahead and do what we did before, where we take the alpha to be the factor there. Perfect. But you can see that if you want to turn this down just a little bit, you could take this factor down a bit. But you can see that the saturation is a little strong. So I'm just going to go ahead and drop in a color, hue saturation value node. And with this node, we can just crank the saturation down to about 0.9. And you can get a bit of a more desaturated look going on there. And I think that looks pretty good. You can also make the blacks even a little blacker if you feel like it's looking a little bit too soft. And that's looking pretty good. And you can see that our shadow is also applied over the scene there as well. And things are looking not too bad. The last thing to kind of add some extra effect to your scene is to add some glow. We can add filter, glare, drop that right in there. We're going to change this from streaks to a fog glow, and then just start cranking the threshold down until you see it applied to your scene in the right amount. Whatever looks good to you. Something around a 0.3 or 0.2 works pretty well, and that kind of just adds some glows to the scene that also helps kind of blend the subject into the background. Now, this is close to being finished, just one step left, and this is the ambient occlusion. Now this took a little bit of tweaking because we don't have a real 3D object, we're just using a plane here, but I found it did add some realism, so I'm going to show you guys how to do that to finish off the end of the video here. So, the ambient occlusion is going to be a way that we can kind of add some shadows underneath my body to kind of match it looking like I'm sitting on this city. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a color ramp. So Shift A, Converter, Color Ramp. I'm going to take the AO output of our render layer and drop it into the color ramp here. And as you can see, we have this image. And I'm going to take the black value here and crank it up a bit so we get even more of that blackness that we want for our ambient occlusion. Crank it up a bit, and then I'm going to take the whites down as well because I want this to really be only black in the areas here and not everywhere else on the scene. And then once I get the value pretty close, somewhere around here, I'm going to take the intensity down a little bit. So I'm going to make it just a little bit of a softer gray, something like that. What we have to do is we have to make it so it's only on the object here and not on the background because we don't want to affect the background. And the way we can do that is by adding a color ramp, Shift A, Converter, Color Ramp, and using the alpha into the color ramp. Drop it right there. All we have to do is go color invert now. So we invert this. If I show you guys what we're looking at, we have the alpha plugged in right there. And then if we invert it, it's obviously going to be the inverse of this. And I'm just going to screen it then over the top. So screening it is going to take the white values then and make the black values here white, essentially. So I'm going to put this in the top socket, this one on the bottom, so it's screening over it, and change the mix type to screen. With that said and done, you can just click on your node here, and you can see that we have the white in the background, and this is the only black area. Now, the reason I added this color ramp is so we can tweak the edges here a bit. If I bring the blacks up a bit, you can see that we fix those edges that were kind of looking bad there. So go ahead and do that a bit, and then you have the black values that you're looking for. Now what we're going to do with these black values is we're going to multiply them over our scene here to add that extra bit of ambient occlusion, you could say. So to do that, it's just a color mix, drop it in there, change it to multiply, and we're going to drop this in the bottom socket. If you go ahead and look at that now, you can see that the black on me is definitely helping to kind of blend the shadows and stuff of the lower body into the scene here, and it looks quite a bit better, I thought. So you can take the factor down a little bit if you think it's looking too strong or not. Just down a little bit I thought looked good, and there you have it. So that looks pretty fancy. If I zoom out a little bit here, you can see you have your object sitting there in the clouds playing music. So that's going to do it, guys. That is the final result from this tutorial. I hope you learned some cool green screen techniques. You can go ahead and render this out as an animation if you wanted to. I have videos on the channel for how to render animations if you don't know how. But that's going to do it. I'd again like to give a big thanks to Storyblocks for sponsoring this video. It's an amazing website. It has some great resources for filmmakers like you and I. So if you're interested in some royalty-free stock footage, definitely check out Storyblocks, link in the description. But that's going to do it for me. Let me know if you liked the video with a comment and a like, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!